Stop running a Zen story to cure your falling behind anxiety. Right now, there is a tight, vibrating twitch located precisely behind your ankle bones, stretching up through your lower calves. It is the physical sensation of an invisible clock ticking directly against your flesh, a relentless pulsing that tells your body you are running out of time. You feel a deep, systemic panic that you have fallen permanently behind an imaginary standard of productivity, financial security, and life success. This chronic restlessness makes your feet feel tense even when you try to lie still, as if your legs are preparing to sprint forward into a race that never actually ends. You are exhausted from carrying the heavy weight of this scarcity, treating your natural fatigue as a dangerous flaw that threatens your future survival. The atmosphere around your body holds a deep, insulating stillness, a cool density that feels completely disconnected from the demanding pace of the daytime world. The air carries the faint, comforting scent of dry pine needles and damp earth, a grounding fragrance that helps to quiet the racing thoughts inside your forehead. The firm foundation of your mattress supports your tired frame, without asking you to produce a single metric or cross a single finish line tonight. There are no balance sheets to balance within this dim sanctuary, and no schedules are being enforced against your weary mind. Your ankles can go completely soft, completely relieved of the constant, defensive labor of trying to outrun your fears. You are not lagging behind the rhythm of the world, and this persistent tremor of inadequacy is not a sign that your life is a failure. It is simply a protective mind trying its best to guard you from scarcity by keeping your body in a state of perpetual momentum. Tonight, there is absolutely no need to accelerate your healing, and we are not going to force your restless legs to instantly become quiet. We are only going to sit together beside a dark, covered forest pit where heavy oak logs learn to cure in absolute isolation from the wind, allowing your inner clock to slow down without requiring a single task to be finished. There is a strange, compelling paradox in the way our anxiety about time and security operates when we feel we are falling behind. The mind assumes that to survive a period of lack, it must burn with a fierce, scattering heat, turning every single hour into a frantic blaze of activity. We look at the passing years, and we see an aggressive predator that must be conquered through constant, unyielding strain. But ancient Buddhist wisdom reveals that true stabilization does not arrive by adding more fuel to the open fire. It comes when we enclose our frantic energy under a thick, protective layer of damp earth, allowing the raw timber of our experience to cool slowly into a solid, unmoving core of deep tranquility. Maybe you have felt this too, during those late hours when you check your bank accounts with a tight stomach or rewrite your resume in the dark, feeling an immediate spike of guilt for merely wanting to close your eyes. It is an exhausting way to carry the evening, using your own anxiety as a whip to drive your body forward, turning your bedroom into an unpaid shift. You do not have to secure your financial future during these still hours, and you do not need to solve the trajectory of your career before your limbs are permitted to sink into the dark. In a short while, we will travel up a high mountain slope into a dense grove of ancient hemlocks, where an elderly woodcutter shows us how a covered charcoal pit transforms raw oak without a single open flame. But before we journey into that quiet, smoldering sanctuary, let your physical body fully accept the safety of this immediate environment. You are resting in a space where no one is measuring your achievements, and no one is judging your stillness as laziness. The loud, expensive demands of the sun cannot penetrate the thick, dark canopy of this evening, leaving you entirely free to soften into the mossy floor without a single deadline to meet. Let your heels sink heavily into the bedding, allowing the solid ground beneath you to take the full physical burden of your ambition. Your breath does not need to be calculated with any sense of rhythmic perfection right now, and there is no requirement to lengthen its pace artificially. Just notice the cool air as it passes through your nostrils, and the warm, quiet release that leaves your chest as your torso settles into the mattress. Every incoming breath is a soft arrival in a world where nothing is running out, and every outgoing breath is a quiet invitation for the vibration behind your ankles to drop down, burying its roots into the heavy, silent clay below. What if the security you have been sprinting to reach is not hidden at the end of an endless track of accumulation? What if the peace you want is already present, waiting just beneath the frantic, protective movements you have used to guard your sensitive heart? Tonight, there are no investments to calculate, no years to catch up on, and no pressure to quiet your restlessness in a single hour. The deep, smoldering spaces of your spirit can remain completely unmapped. The darkness can shelter you without demanding a single coin, and you can allow the heavy oak logs of your life to simply find their own silent cooling in the damp forest floor. The awareness begins to drift away from the immediate room, following a steep path that winds upward into a high forest clearing, where ancient hemlocks cast vast, overlapping shadows upon the mountain floor. The crisp night air carries the deep, grounding scent of charred bark, wet moss, and smoldering clay. This is a highly insulated mountain sanctuary where the rush of the world below cannot penetrate, a quiet landscape dedicated to the slow, invisible transformations of the forest. In the center of this clearing lay a deep earthen pit dug directly into the dark soil, its black mouth surrounded by mounds of damp forest sods that had been cut from the riverbank. Working within the borders of this quiet grove was a young laborer named Kenji. Kenji had spent many months carrying a tight, vibrating twitch behind his ankle bones, a painful sensation of running out of time that made him move with frantic, scattering speed. He felt a deep, systemic panic that he was falling permanently behind the other woodsmen, convinced that if he did not work faster, the approaching winter frost would destroy his livelihood and ruin his position in the village. To escape this constant, exhausting fear of lack, he threw himself into his labor with intense, rushing movements, trying to force his charcoal yield to produce double its value in a single night. To build his charcoal mound, Kenji had gathered split pieces of heavy green oak wood, wet with fresh sap and highly resistant to the heat. He stacked these dense timbers inside the deep pit with frantic haste, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps as he worked under the dim light of a horn lantern. He rammed the raw logs together with tight, anxious force, believing that if he could just create a massive roaring blaze, he would burn away the dampness instantly and secure his financial yield before the frost arrived. His calves were knotted with tension as he hurried across the clearing, his mind fixed entirely on the final profit, unable to witness the true state of the timber beneath his hands. On this quiet evening, as the cold wind began to rattle the high hemlock branches, Kenji struck a spark and tossed a burning branch into the center of his packed pit. He did not wait for the wood to catch naturally, and he did not take the time to seal the air vents with damp sods. Instead, he immediately piled more dry brush on top, hoping to accelerate the curing process through raw, unyielding speed. But the moment the extra oxygen rushed into the unsealed mound, the green oak did not cure into rich, dark carbon. The trapped sap boiled violently inside the bark, and the entire pit erupted into an open, roaring bonfire that lit the clearing with a harsh, destructive orange glare. Under the intense, unmitigated heat of the open flames, the precious green oak wood was rapidly reduced to nothing but thin, gray ash and useless cinders. Kenji fell back against a mossy hemlock trunk, his palms blackened with soot, his chest heaving with a deep, suffocating sense of failure. As he stared at the ruined pit, he felt a hot surge of inadequacy rising through his calves, interpreting the loss as a definitive proof that he was fundamentally incapable of keeping pace with the season. He sat in the cold pine needles, his knees trembling, completely overwhelmed by the crushing weight of his own desperate rush. Master Jogo, an elderly woodcutter and charcoal burner who spent his decades maintaining the smoldering pits of the high slope, did not shout from the shadows, and he did not rush to extinguish the dying embers. His heavy boots made a slow, rhythmic crunching sound on the dry needles as he approached from the far side of the clearing, his movements carrying the unhurried stability of the mountain itself. He stood before the smoking pit, his face completely neutral as the fading glow of the ashes caught the deep lines of his weathered skin. He reached into his belt and pulled out a single, split piece of green oak wood that had rolled away from the fire, its grain still wet with unburned sap. He did not offer an immediate lecture on forestry, and he did not help Kenji clear away the gray cinders. He simply placed the dense, heavy piece of green oak directly into Kenji's trembling hands, letting the raw weight of the timber rest across the young man's palms in the cool night air. He asked Kenji what happens to the sap when a log is forced to meet an open fire without a proper blanket of earth. Kenji looked down at the dark grain, his breath catching in his throat, whispering that the wood destroys itself because the heat moves too fast for the moisture to escape safely. The old charcoal burner nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the rough, damp bark of the green oak without a single hint of tension. He remarked that the heavy timber does not transform into solid carbon by burning with a loud, scattering glare or by rushing to meet the frost before its time. It cures into an enduring, valuable asset precisely because it is sealed inside a dark, airtight chamber, allowing its internal moisture to disperse slowly under a thick layer of damp earth. Jogo explained that Kenji's fire had ruined the yield because the young man was demanding that the raw wood transform instantly through aggression, rather than allowing its heat to be enclosed by the quiet gravity of the pit. He then turned and walked back toward his small bark hut, leaving the young laborer alone with the heavy green log and the immense protective silence of the dark forest. The cool moisture of the mountain evening settled against Kenji's skin, leaving a damp film on his forearms as he sat perfectly still beside the smoking pit. He remained on the ground for a long time, his eyes fixed on the dense piece of green oak as its weight pressed firmly into his open palms. A quiet, heavy realization began to filter through the tight vibration behind his ankle bones, a feeling that felt as grounding and spacious as the deep forest floor itself. He saw, with sudden clarity, that his frantic attempts to outrun the winter were not a sign of true efficiency, but the result of his profound terror of running out of time and resources. He had been treating his own body like a green log that had to be driven into an open flame through sheer defensive panic, burning his spirit out to protect himself from an imaginary failure. Looking at how the simple piece of oak required a slow, enclosed cooling to find its ultimate utility, he began to see that his chronic restlessness was an illusion built by his own frantic speed. The collapse of his fire was no longer an absolute disaster to be mourned with shame, but a gentle invitation to let his frantic energy settle beneath the heavy blankets of the earth. This lowering of your internal flame into the dark forest pit is not a demand that you freeze your emotional core, or turn yourself into an unfeeling block of wood that feels nothing when the frost settles over the valley. It is not an invitation to become entirely numb to the genuine difficulties of managing your resources or planning your life in an uncertain economy. The deep insights of Buddhist wisdom point toward a much softer, gentler realization about the way we carry our scarcity panic. When we look closely at our chronic internal racing, we discover that the true exhaustion does not come from the simple fact that a year passed quickly or a budget felt tight. The real agony deepens when the mind tries to run ahead of the sun, spending its precious energy building an unyielding fire of anxiety, demanding that our security be achieved through absolute, frantic speed. In our everyday struggles, we often mistake a tight, defensive momentum for a form of necessary survival strategy. We believe that if we continuously move with scattering speed, or if we ensure that we never take a single hour to rest, we can outrun the cold hand of failure. This internal tightening is a form of deep craving, an urgent demand that our future must be completely guaranteed before we will ever allow our tired feet to touch the ground. When we exist in this state of hypervigilance, we are constantly overtaxing our own spiritual structure, leaving no room for the soul to discover the quiet, steady stabilization that runs beneath the shifting seasons of our lives. Consider how much extra friction you introduce to your tired body when you judge yourself for feeling exhausted at the end of an unproductive afternoon. The original moment of limitation was a single, passing event, like a cold wind blowing through the high hemlock branches during an ordinary morning. But the mind immediately panics, treating that passing shadow as a permanent proof of financial ruin that must be conquered through absolute, frantic effort. We light the roaring bonfire of our self-criticism, using it to consume all the remaining energy we have left. We layer an entirely new layer of self-inflicted shame on top of the original fatigue, turning a natural human need for rest into a heavy burning monument of internal distress. True awareness within the quiet shaded groves of your consciousness is simply the willingness to notice the exact moment your ankles lock into that defensive posture of flight. It is the ability to see the passing financial worry without using your own mind to fan its flames into a destructive glare. You recognize the tight twitch behind your calf bones. You feel the cold weight of lack gathering behind your eyes. But you do not allow that sensation to drag you back into the old narrative of being permanently behind in life. You become like the old woodcutter, stepping back from the smoking cinders, realizing that what your spirit needs right now is not a fiercer blaze, but a total relaxation into the damp, insulating soil. This requires an immense sense of compassionate understanding, which is nothing more than the courage to meet your own profound restlessness without turning it into an indictment against your capability. Your deep desire for stability, to be secure and free from the terrifying weight of lack, is not a structural weakness, but a naturally tender reflex that simply has nowhere to safely land in this immediate hour. When you catch your mind rehearsing future emergencies to prove you cannot afford to sleep, you can look at that process with a completely soft, non-judgmental gaze. You can acknowledge that your internal guardian is simply trying to keep you safe from the frost, even if its rigid methods are currently grinding your health down to gray ash. The reality of our human existence is inherently subject to change, tied together by a vast invisible rhythm that moves through our separate seasons, like the slow growth of the deep forest roots. This underlying impermanence can feel deeply intimidating to a mind that has learned to survive only through absolute velocity. Yet it is also the very womb through which true financial and emotional freedom enters. The heavy, anxious situations that feel so permanent and crushing tonight are actually subject to the same laws of transition as everything else beneath the canopy. They only keep their suffocating weight when we continuously apply the artificial draft of our panic. When we drop the rigid demands of our self-reliance, the frantic flames naturally lose their force, relaxing into the wider, dense dark of the evening pit. Letting go does not mean you pretend your bills do not exist, or that you automatically ignore the real requirements of your practical life. It simply means you stop using your own precious energy to maintain an open fire of worry in your bedroom tonight. It is the wisdom to see that you can carry a deep sensitivity for your security, without allowing that sensitivity to become a permanent treadmill of exhaustion. You are giving your awareness permission to find its true alignment, not by forcing yourself to catch up to an imaginary crowd, but by trusting the massive dark ground that holds every living thing in a single quiet stabilization. Slowly, this quiet understanding stops being a distant philosophy, and it begins to touch the immediate texture of your resting body. You start to see that the peace you have been sprinting to reach is not hidden at the end of an endless track of accumulation. It is found the very moment you allow your pace to settle, stepping off the treadmill of constant self-protection. Even if it is only for the duration of this single dark night, the uncarved logs of your experience can remain precisely as they are, raw and damp, without threatening your fundamental capacity to be held by the earth. You can choose to be the vast undisturbed forest within which the charcoal cools, completely anchored by an internal stillness that needs no external achievement to authorize its rest. If it feels right inside your body, let us step into a quiet chamber of soft observation together. There is no need to adjust your position with any sense of sudden urgency, or to strive for a rigid ideal of perfection tonight. Simply allow your physical frame to melt into the steady support beneath you, recognizing that right now, you have absolutely no roles to perform and no maps to finalize. The day has already locked its gates. The voices of expectation have grown quiet across the distance, and the future has not yet arrived to carve its demands into your skin. Perhaps you can bring your attention to the natural, effortless movement of your lower torso. You do not need to deepen your breathing artificially, and there is no requirement to master a complex pattern of inhalation or exhalation right now. Just observe the air as it arrives, cool and nameless, and notice how it departs, carrying a small fraction of your internal friction out into the room. With each quiet release of the breath, you might invite the tiny muscles around your ankles and lower calves to unhook, letting the skin across your brow become loose like a smooth sheet of damp moss left under a soft light. As you rest here, a specific, heavy thought may drift into the center of your awareness. It might be a memory of an old transaction, a persistent worry about an unfamiliar role, or a quiet sense of frustration for not finding your footing during the afternoon. Instead of pushing that thought away with anger, and instead of diving into its story to fix it, simply note its presence. Even noticing is enough, for it shows you are no longer drowning in the churning pool of that old anxiety. You can return whenever you are ready to this simple space of observation, letting the mental pattern receive a gentle name, labeling it quietly as racing, or accumulating, or guarding the fire. Now, imagine holding that single, split piece of heavy green oak wood we observed inside Master Jogo's forest clearing. Picture its rough, damp bark resting across the open, uncurled palms of your mind, its raw grain catching the dim, smoky light of the horn lantern. That dense timber represents every unvoiced ache, every fear of an uncertain future, and every rigid demand for absolute speed you have been carrying since your youth. That heavy wood is the exact shape of your current emotional fatigue. It is the physical manifestation of your mind trying to maintain absolute, punishing momentum through sheer willpower alone, separate from the ground. If it feels safe, try letting that green log drop completely in your mind's eye, picturing it slipping from your fingers and setting down into the deep forest clay with a low final thud. There is no need to rush this image, and nothing needs to change instantly within your body right now. Just observe what happens when the frantic draft of oxygen is completely cut off, allowing the unsealed mound to settle into a soft, unweighted heap that requires no effort to keep ablaze. As that tension leaves your frame, imagine the wide, dark earthen pit within your lower legs beginning to open and expand. Watch the narrow, frantic loops of your defensive thoughts begin to widen out and slow down, merging into the vast, protective walls of a cavern that requires no effort to contain its shape. With every breath you take, feel that identical softening taking place behind your ankle bones, down through your spine and into your mattress. The rigid, frozen molds of your ancient accelerations are losing their form, spreading out into a much wider, more supportive landscape of simple presence. The mind does not need to change its history, and you do not need to dissolve your boundaries to find peace tonight. Your presence simply glides there, a quiet, unweighted awareness that makes a low, soothing rhythm as it moves through the open forest spaces. You can let that imagery change now, allowing the smoldering pit and the green timber to dissolve back into the dark background of your mind, leaving only the steady, spacious sensation of your own breathing body. There is absolutely no pressure on you to achieve total emotional clarity or a sudden transformation tonight. Healing is a gradual uncoiling of old internal bracing patterns, not a violent event that happens in a single hour. You are fully permitted to carry a small amount of residual restlessness in the background, without needing to analyze it or judge it as a mistake. Just remaining aware of the weight you have been carrying is a profound act of self-preservation. Perhaps you can feel the heavy weight of your hips sinking deeper into the bedding, letting gravity perform the work of holding you steady without your personal effort. Your hands can remain open, completely empty of tools, fully excused from the work of building a permanent barrier against the frost. You are returning to the uncomplicated truth of the present moment, where the room is safe, the stillness has settled, and the night is slowly unfolding its quiet architecture around your bed. Whenever you are ready, you can simply let your attention rest on the natural boundary, where your breath meets the cool air of the room. You have maintained the tension for many long miles, and you have driven the pace with immense loyalty through the heat of the day. Now the heavy timber is dropped. The foundation has found its natural relaxation in the dark, and you are fully permitted to exist without a single deadline attached to your name. 3 weeks after the open fire had reduced his precious timber to gray cinders, a freezing rain blanketed the high hemlock groves, locking the mountain clearing in a cold, slate-colored stillness. The old wood storage sheds that Kenji had spent his youth organizing sat completely empty, filled with nothing but damp drafts and the smell of stagnant moisture. The young laborer spent his mornings wandering among the abandoned pits, his ankles stiff from the biting mountain wind, his chest tight with a persistent, heavy bitterness. He had refused to stack a single log in the newly dug trenches, treating the approaching winter frost as a hostile executioner. that had stripped away his financial security and left him entirely exposed to a completely unpredictable future. He spent hours tracing the old borders of the timber yard with a heavy iron shovel, unable to look at the cold, empty pits without a sharp surge of internal panic. On this cloudy morning, Master Jogo did not ask Kenji to chop down more mountain oak, and he did not instruct him to clean out the ruined cinders from the bonfire site. Instead, the elderly charcoal burner placed a small, hand-woven grass basket filled with damp river silt into Kenji's hands, its moist surface cool and heavy against his calloused palms. Jogo quietly requested that Kenji walk down to the lowest earthen mound, where a tiny vent hole was allowing a small thread of white smoke to escape, and use the wet silt to seal the aperture against the outer air. When Kenji heard this request, a hot wave of irritation rushed into his calves, his throat tightening with an intense, defensive reluctance. He felt that working on a slow, covered pit was an admission of total failure, a formal acceptance of a slow process that would never generate enough material success to protect him from the winter. He stood at the edge of the smoldering mound, his hands gripping the woven grass basket, his mind spinning a fast web of arguments to avoid the chore. He felt a strong urge to toss the silt into the underbrush and leave the mountain settlement entirely, preferring the cold numbness of his anger over the vulnerability of cooperating with a process he could not accelerate. He looked down at the tiny vent hole, expecting to find Master Jogo watching him with an air of strict authority. But the old woodcutter was already kneeling near a mossy log, his attention entirely fixed on sharpening an old iron axe head. Jogo's presence was completely quiet and neutral, like a massive block of mountain stone that remained undisturbed by the passing fog. Kenji closed his eyes for a single slow breath, intentionally choosing to sit with the dizzying surge of financial uncertainty rather than allowing it to dictate his steps. He noted the sharp clenching behind his ankle bones, recognizing that his defensive urgency was not an absolute truth about his survival, but a protective shield against the unknown. He stepped onto the wet clay of the covered pit, lowered his fingers into the small grass basket, and began a slow, deliberate application of the damp river silt over the escaping smoke. He felt the heavy drag of the mud against his skin as he smoothed the paste over the small, hidden opening. With each methodical application of the wet silt, Kenji watched the thin thread of white smoke taper down, transforming into a faint, barely visible indigo haze that hung motionless in the cold air. He worked with a slow, deliberate discipline that required no immediate answers from the market or the season, simply sealing the chamber step by step in the quiet morning atmosphere. As the vent hole was completely covered under his steady pressure, the internal temperature of the pit stabilized, settling into a dense, completely contained smolder that produced no sound or crackle beneath the earth. Kenji's breath caught in his throat, his hands stopping mid-movement as he looked at the completely silent mound. Nourished by the dark containment of the airtight chamber, the green oak wood was not burning away into useless ash, but was slowly carbonizing into dense, high-grade charcoal that would hold its heat long into the deepest freeze of the winter. This rare, durable fuel required the complete exclusion of oxygen and a slow, invisible curing process to find its ultimate value, meaning it could never have formed in the rapid, bright glare of an open fire. The very darkness that Kenji had fought with so much fury was the exact condition needed to mature the raw timber into a permanent asset. The slow pacing of the mountain was not a failure of his design, but the opening of a deeper, more resilient resource. He did not instantly become a joyful master of patience, and the memory of his lost yield did not vanish from his heart. But a subtle, permanent transformation altered his stance toward his own suffering. He looked down at the empty grass basket, no longer seeing it as a symbol of unpaid labor, but as a simple tool of partnership with the living forest. He carefully laid the basket against a wet root, wiped the dark silt from his fingers, and sat down at the edge of the covered pit without a single second left to chase in his mind. When we look deeper into the architecture of our own exhaustion, we begin to discover the hidden gears that keep our suffering in motion. We live under the constant illusion that if we hold ourselves rigidly enough, we can somehow dictate the behavior of the world around us. We use our analytical minds to rehearse future scripts, to replay old conversations with bitter regret, and to construct elaborate defenses against scenarios that may never come to pass. This constant internal labor is driven by an underlying terror of the unknown, a belief that an unexpected shift in our reality will completely destroy our foundation. We treat our internal space as a battlefield where every single uninvited thought must be subdued, and where every flash of anxiety must be instantly corrected through internal scolding. This mental pattern is exactly how we convert a passing moment of vulnerability into a permanent, heavy identity of lack. We take the raw, natural discomfort of being a human being in an unpredictable world, and we immediately wrap it in layers of profound self-judgment. We tell ourselves that if we were truly wise, or if we were spiritually mature, our minds would be as silent as a desert night. We try to repair our fragile sense of peace by using shame as a tool, wrapping our consciousness in a tight grip of constant correction. In doing so, we become completely trapped in our own defense mechanisms, mistaking the frantic ticking of our protective thoughts for the truth of who we actually are. The ancient insights of the Buddha provide a beautiful, liberating distinction that can help your tired mind find its true center tonight. There is a fundamental difference between the natural friction that life introduces to our path and the immense weight of suffering that our resistance adds afterward. The basic unexpected events of our existence, like the sudden winter frost that settles over a high mountain slope, are simply a part of living. They arrive without our permission, shaking our stability for a temporary moment. But they do not possess the power to break our deepest spirit. The agony begins when we refuse to let the day unfold naturally, when we spend our precious energy trying to force an unpredictable reality into a rigid box. Imagine a large timber sluice gate that has been built to guide a gentle forest stream into a lower mill pond. If a sudden mountain storm washes a single heavy pine log down the channel, the initial impact is just a raw, unpreventable clash against the wooden slats. This represents the basic pain that life brings. But if the gatekeeper panics at the sudden weight and slams his own iron pry bars into the mechanism to lock the gears into rigid immobility, the wooden frame will splinter and buckle under the compounding pressure of the dammed water. The presence of the drifting pine log was an accident of the weather, but the desperate demand that the channel must never encounter an obstacle is what breaks the gate. This is exactly how our hypervigilance operates within our chest. The original transition is unexpected, but our immediate, urgent need to override it through shame is what creates the suffocating tightness that keeps us awake at night. True serenity does not require you to live a life where the log never drifts, or where your mind never experiences a single ripple of fear. That is an unachievable ideal, a decorative mirage that only forces you to grind your internal spirit tighter out of frustration. True freedom arrives when you alter your entire relationship with that initial vulnerability. Recognizing that you can allow the texture of the moment to exist without turning it into a personal failure. You can notice the sudden surge of a racing thought. You can feel the old expectation rising in your throat, and you can simply let that energy move through your space without treating it as an absolute emergency. You are no longer trying to force your life to look like a permanent stone monument, for you are learning to trust the raw, uncarved nature that anchors you underneath the noise. When you step off the treadmill of constant self-fixation, you discover that you do not need to use shame to manage your internal world. Your fear of entering an unfamiliar landscape is not an enemy to be conquered, but an overstimulated guardian that simply needs to be shown the quiet water waiting in the basin below. By allowing your awareness to drop down into that lower, settled space, you give the old ancestral bracing permission to naturally disperse. You stop interpreting your tiredness as a personal defect, and you start seeing it as a temporary, moving part within a much larger, more spacious architecture. The world may continue to hold high expectations for a little while longer, but the core of your being remains entirely unbothered, resting heavily in its own silent gravity. This internal racing does not only manifest within a hidden forest clearing during a freezing mountain thaw. It mirrors itself continuously in the quiet, contemporary landscapes of your everyday routine. You experience this rigid momentum every time you glance down at your phone, watching a blank notification screen, waiting for an answer that does not arrive, feeling the muscles along your lower calves tighten as the digital silence grows louder. It happens when you lie perfectly still at midnight, replaying a minor misstep from an earlier professional interaction, turning the key of your self-criticism until your ankles feel stiff with regret. You feel it when you look at the seemingly seamless achievements of your peers online, concluding that your own quiet, unpolished life is a definitive failure. We carry an immense amount of unvoiced pressure while moving through our modern schedules, offering a smooth, polite smile to our companions, while our internal space is vibrating with the fear of running out of time. We try to micromanage the emotional climate of our relationships, hoping that if we can just control every external variable, we can prevent our hearts from being fractured by an uncertain future. We look to our devices for a brief hit of reassurance, trying to use a glass screen to patch over a somatic tremor that actually requires deep, uncarved space. When we finally do give ourselves permission to sit down or close our eyes, a fierce wave of historical guilt instantly arises, whispering that stillness is a luxury we have not yet produced enough success to deserve. Bringing this ancient, mud-sealed pit wisdom into your daily reality means discovering how to introduce a small pause before you allow an old reaction to claim your body. It means that when a sudden panic tells you to over-prepare for a routine interaction, you stop for the duration of a single unhurried breath. You do not try to crush the protective impulse, and you do not scold yourself for feeling separate. You simply observe the frantic energy rising behind your ribs, recognizing it as an old, inherited script trying to dictate your current posture. By giving that pattern a moment of open visibility, you choose not to obey its rigid command, allowing the churning sediment to settle before it can warp your entire evening. You can care intensely about your commitments, your loved ones, and your future, without pressing your fingers so tightly against your boundaries that your mind turns to absolute ice. True stability is practicing the art of moving through your duties with a loose, flexible grip, understanding that you can offer your presence without needing to guarantee a perfectly static outcome. When you feel the familiar urge to perform arising, you can remember the raw, unpolished earthen pit that cures its timber beautifully precisely because it connects to the entire earth. You can allow your awareness to drop below the internal commentary of your critics, anchoring yourself in the solid, unembellished center of your own immediate reality. You do not need to check a single box or fulfill a single expectation to qualify for a period of absolute non-doing tonight. Rest is not a decorative prize reserved for the flawless achiever, but the very cavern of clear water that keeps your internal slate clean and resilient over the years. When you let your limbs sink into the bed without demanding a blueprint for next week, you are letting the heavy stone monument of your reputation drop completely into the dark ground. You are allowing the micro-components of your consciousness to find their natural clearance, not by forcing them to look perfect, but by trusting the vast, unwritten space that naturally exists when the old tool is set down. This subtle shift in your daily rhythm does not mean your life will suddenly become free of challenging conversations, unexpected delays, or real human weight. The world will continue to present you with unpredictable seasons, complicated dynamics, and moments of profound uncertainty. But you will no longer meet those moments by locking your joints into a state of brittle compliance. You will discover that you can stand in the middle of a demanding week with a soft, spacious heart, moving through your hours with a measured, unhurried gait. You are slowly learning to exist as the wide, raw vault within which the silence is guided, fully anchored by an internal peace that needs no external validation to authorize its existence. The quiet, mud-sealed forest pit is fading now into the complete dark stillness of the midnight hour. Deep within the mountain slopes, the cool forest air has settled into an absolute equilibrium, absorbing the tiny echoes of the slow, rustling hemlock canopy until the clearing feels entirely soft, insulated, and silent. The small grass basket has finished its labor, resting empty and damp on the forest floor, its wet silt completely dried over the dark mound to lock the heat inside. The split piece of heavy green oak has found its place in the dark chamber, its unhurried transformation proceeding without a single sound or open glare. There are no more fires to accelerate, No more lost yields to evaluate, and no more defensive sprints to plan before the village below begins its morning routine. Your physical form is becoming incredibly heavy, sinking down into the supportive expanse of your bedding like a dense log, losing its internal moisture and settling perfectly flat into a deep blanket of protective earth. Let the sensitive muscles behind your ankle bones and along the sides of your lower calves unhook completely, releasing the hidden, vibrating tightness that kept your legs in a state of perpetual flight through the demanding hours of the day. Your limbs rest slack and empty of momentum, abandoning the old, frantic habit of outrunning your fears in a world that feels too fast to manage. Your shoulders are perfectly soft, your spine widening against the mattress, fully excused from the lifelong labor of chasing after security through sheer willpower alone. Your breathing has slowed to a faint, effortless rhythm, a quiet movement that matches the deep, timeless cooling of the charcoal pits hidden far up on the hemlock slopes. Each quiet inhalation is a soft arrival in a sanctuary where nothing is running out, and each quiet exhalation is the slow, smooth leveling of the internal clocks that kept your spirit tightly bound. You are no longer measuring your professional progress. You are no longer replaying your financial adjustments. And you are no longer checking your mind to see if you have produced enough value to earn your rest. The entire theater of your restlessness has dissolved into the shadows, leaving you completely nameless, unmeasured, and free within the deep dark. The deep wisdom of the sealed pit is drifting quietly into the center of your heart, bypassing your analytical thoughts entirely. You are absorbing the profound comfort of the slow-curing timbers, realizing that your true stability was never the rapid, scattering fire you were trying so hard to maintain through your panic. You are letting the hidden, silent roots of your existence simply move through the darkness, dropping down beneath the memory of your limitations into the immense womb of the earth. You have absolute permission to stop solving your life for tonight, for there are no deadlines to meet in this quiet room, and no expectations waiting to be fulfilled before your eyes are allowed to close. The world can continue its complex, demanding choreography when the sun returns, but your inner sanctuary remains entirely unbothered, resting heavily in its own silent gravity. You are allowed to slip away into the unwritten dark that remains when the heavy armor of your hypervigilance is left on the forest floorboards. The smoke has cleared completely from the clearing. The mound is silent, and the vast protective architecture of the night is fully prepared to shelter your sleep without requiring a single milestone in return. Let the final lines of your scarcity soften until they blend into the quiet, cool stillness of the earth. Perhaps the real wealth you have been chasing is the quiet capacity to let the fire go out, knowing the ground will always hold the warmth. The mind may hesitate at the threshold of this dense, unmoving stillness, unaccustomed to an atmosphere where no miles must be cleared and no metrics of security are being calculated. For so many years, the habit of urgent forward momentum has been your constant shield, a quiet, defensive coordinator whispering that any moment of unprotected rest was a dangerous delay that would allow the frost to overtake your life. You believed that if you did not constantly stoke the fire and accelerate your pace, the entire structure of your future would dissolve into lack or leave you entirely vulnerable to the judgments of the world. Yet, as you lie here in the deep, unmeasured quiet of the evening, the cool air continues to deaden the old, frantic rhythms of accumulation. You are beginning to see that the constant tightening of your calves did not protect your sensitive heart. It only made your frame too rigid to feel the natural, supportive gravity of the earth when the seasons began to shift on their own. Let your awareness sink another layer into the absolute stillness of your immediate surroundings, allowing the physical weight of your chest to expand and settle without a single effort. There is a profound, instinctual intelligence in your muscles that knows exactly how to unravel when the analytical mind drops its heavy timber and steps away from the unsealed mound. This internal softening does not require you to master a hidden technique. It does not demand a sudden breakthrough of financial clarity, and it certainly does not ask you to erase the memory of past professional friction. It simply invites you to leave the clay flat over the pit, to stop running your fingers over the dry cinders of yesterday's adjustments. and to let the raw, uncarved surface of your presence just be. Even if a faint whisper of unfinished balance sheets continues to hover in the background of your thoughts, you can simply let it drift like a stray molecule of sweet oak smoke, completely harmless, completely distant, finding its own quiet baseline in the dark. Think of how the quiet forest clearing appears when the heavy oaken gates below have been barred for the night, and the last lantern in the valley settlement has turned to a silent wick of dark oil. The great hemlock branches and the deep earthen pits do not vanish into the gloom, but their sharp, demanding outlines soften into the vast, protective shadow of the mountain roots. The grove is still completely intact, perfectly capable of curing the logs and guiding the hidden sap when the new season arrives. But right now it has absolutely nothing to produce for the silence. It does not need to justify its existence by participating in a constant race of achievements. It simply rests, anchored by the heavy, unchanging gravity of the soil beneath the pine needles, entirely content to let the cool darkness move through the trees without a single ounce of resistance. You are fully permitted to inhabit that same unbothered stillness tonight, letting the urgent outlines of your modern schedule soften and fade into the cool, dark air around your bed. The messages that remain unanswered, the resources that still look completely unfinished, and the personal milestones that seem to be moving much slower than the lives of those around you do not need to be resolved before your eyes can close. They can remain precisely as they are, rough, incomplete, and uncertain, resting safely in the wide, patient custody of the unknown, while your tired spirit drops far beneath the surface of the day's evaluations. True peace is not the destination where every single line of your ledger has been perfectly finalized and every deadline has been met with absolute precision. It is the profound, liberating capacity to lay your body down right in the middle of the unmapped design, letting your palms uncurl and your breath go loose while the world continues its unpredictable turning in the dark. With each quiet breath that travels through your frame, feel the wide, concentric rings of your awareness opening up even further, creating spacious chambers where no friction can take place. The air moves through your body easily, a neutral and unhurried traveler that reminds you of the native resilience that has always lived beneath your defensive velocity. You are returning home to a version of yourself that existed long before you were taught that you had to be flawlessly productive to be worthy of safety and comfort. You are returning to the clear, open consciousness that simply observes the passage of the hours without ever being diminished or defined by the scarcities that fell across the page. You are the vast, solid mountain slope, not the transient storm that shakes the hemlock needles. You are the deep, dark sea of the night, not the small clouds that pass across its face. Let the total weight of your frame sink deeper into the support of the bed, letting go of the subtle, invisible bracing that lives behind your eyes and around the corners of your jaw. There are no horizons to scan in this quiet room, no sudden losses to defend against, and no hidden flaws to repair within the steady, comforting silence of the house. Your long afternoon of loyal guarding has reached its natural boundaries, and the dark night has arrived to take over the watch, wrapping your entire life in a soft, seamless blanket of absolute safety. You do not need to carry the weight of tomorrow's performance before the morning light arrives to guide your fingers. For now, the iron tool is cold, the basket is empty, and you are fully allowed to dissolve into the spacious, timeless dark that has been waiting all along to receive your weary heart. The silence continues to deepen, spreading outward from your chest like clean mineral dampness, moving across a smooth piece of forest clay, untying the remaining fibers of your day until they are completely loose and transparent. There is no longer any ledger to balance, no reputation to maintain, and no historical script that requires your continuous presence. Every element of your awareness is slowing down to a faint whisper, easing into a state of non-resistance where the boundaries of your anxiety feel beautifully soft, open, and light. You are drifting now in the vast, unmeasured current of the evening, fully supported by the steady ground, entirely free from the obligation to be anything at all. The workspace is dark, the mound is quiet, and your heart is fully permitted to let go of the pattern, falling gently into the deep, dreamless rest that has been waiting all along to welcome you home. This welcoming home is not a temporary shelter that you must constantly defend against the arrival of the morning, nor is it a conditional harbor that will be taken away when the demands of your schedule shift around you once more. It is the vast original baseline of your entire being, a deep and unblemished sanctuary that remains completely untroubled by the temporary waves of scarcity and abundance that pass across the surface of the world. As the physical weight of your body presses deep into the mattress, imagine the last microscopic particles of fine wood smoke within that covered forest pit, slowly losing their momentum, drifting downward through the dark crevices until they rest perfectly flat against the clay floor. The internal turbulence has completely spent its force, leaving the underground chamber so smooth and undisturbed that it becomes a perfect, dark reflection of the immense silence of the mountain roots. You are no longer required to fan the embers. You are no longer required to accelerate the cure, and you can allow the heavy sediment of your daily racing to sink completely out of sight. The mind often struggles to conceptualize a sense of true safety that does not rely on absolute relentless movement, believing that if it lets down its guard for even a single evening, it will be left entirely stranded in a cold, empty vacuum. We treat our internal environment as a fragile tower that must be constantly driven forward against the movements of the calendar, burning through our own vitality to insulate our sensitive spirits from the risk of falling behind. But look closely at the true architecture of this forest night, where the dense stillness softens the borders of every separate path, showing us that our deepest resilience does not live in our capacity to outrun the clock. True strength is found in the quiet, supportive capacity of the underlying earth to hold every root and every stone in a single, continuous embrace, proving that the time before us is not an aggressive predator, but the very ground that allows our lives to mature. You do not need to perfect a frantic pace of productivity to be secure tonight, for the very emptiness that felt so intimidating during the day is the exact space where your soul is learning to widen its foundation. Let the comforting, heavy density of this understanding settle deep into your physical core, warming the spaces between your shoulder blades and smoothing out the long muscles of your lower back. Your body does not need to stay on high alert to protect your financial survival, and your mind does not need to resolve a single material complication before your awareness is permitted to dissolve into the dark. Every incoming breath is a gentle reminder that you are entirely separate from the frantic commentary of your protective thoughts, a spacious and silent sky that merely observes the passing weather without ever being diminished by the storm. Every outgoing breath is a quiet invitation to let the remaining layers of your defensive identity drop onto the floorboards, leaving you entirely light, nameless, and untethered as you drift further away from the waking shore. Think of how the quiet, carbonizing timber rests deep within the subterranean earth during these late hours, completely unconcerned with the grand interactions of the marketplace or the previous destruction of the open bonfire. The deep pit does not hurry its internal temperature to meet an artificial deadline of success, and it does not carry a sense of personal failure because it resides far beneath the bright, expensive light of the sun. It simply exists in a state of perfect, organic stability, absorbing the quiet density of the forest slope, trusting the slow and silent laws of nature to maintain its balance without a single ounce of human effort. You can allow your own inner landscape to rest in that same patient custody tonight, letting go of the exhausting demand to prove your efficiency to those who cannot see your heart. The invisible veins of the earth have placed you precisely where your spirit needs to open, and you can trust the vast, dark cradle of the night to hold you steady without a single ounce of your personal manipulation. The silence of your room continues to expand, a deep and velvet darkness that softens the sharp angles of your modern responsibilities until they lose their demanding form completely. The digital world has turned off its lights, the voices of comparison have retreated into the fog, and there is not a single critic standing over your bed to measure the efficiency of your resting hours. You are fully permitted to be completely unproductive tonight, to let the unfinished projects sit in the shadows like uncarved logs, entirely free from the obligation to repair your career before the morning light returns. You are entering a sacred sanctuary of non-doing, a boundless realm where your worth is an absolute and unchanging truth that requires no masterpieces, no flawless financial statements, and no external approval to validate its existence. With every slow, rhythmic rise and fall of your chest, feel yourself sinking deeper into the vast undercurrent of the evening, letting the heavy gravity of the bed take the full physical burden of your journey. Your hands are perfectly loose, your fingers are uncurled, and the long lines of tension that lived behind your knees have completely dissolved into a smooth, comforting warmth that spreads through your entire frame. You are no longer replaying the adjustments of the previous season. You are no longer rehearsing the defensive scripts of tomorrow, and you are no longer trying to force the river of time to change its direction. You are simply the deep, quiet basin within which the wood has found its perfect equilibrium, an unchanging mirror of peace that reflects nothing but the immense, protective shadow of the night. The remaining imagery of the forest clearing and the old charcoal burner begins to melt into the soft, dark background of your awareness, leaving only the steady, soothing sound of your own breathing body. The iron shovel is motionless, the silt mark is dry, the grass basket has found its rest at the edge of the pit, and the entire mountain has surrendered to the silent density of the earth. There is nothing left to guard against, nothing left to control, and no old territory left to mourn within the wide, patient safety of this room. You are fully permitted to let go of the map, allowing your heart to follow the slow, steady leveling of the stream as it carries you home into a profound, dreamless, and unmeasured sleep. Let your mind float out into that wide, transparent dark, where the boundaries of your anxiety become completely weightless, dissolving like a single drop of rain falling into a silent mountain lake. You have stood on the crumbling bank for many long miles, and you have fought the current with immense loyalty through the heat of the day. But now the timber is dropped, the vents are closed, and the night has arrived to wash away the last traces of your fatigue. You are returning to the primitive, uncarved center of your being, a deep well of tranquility that has never been touched by the disruptions of the outer world. The workspace is completely dark, the ground is perfectly quiet, and you are fully allowed to exist without a single boundary attached to your name, resting heavily in an ancient, unbroken peace that needs no explanation to authorize its rest. As the last echoes of the waking world fade into the absolute quiet of the midnight hour, the entire universe seems to draw a single, collective breath of total surrender, wrapping your life in a soft, seamless blanket of absolute safety. The future can wait in the fog until the sun returns to guide your fingers, for right now there are no channels to dig, no roles to maintain, and no historical scripts that require your continuous presence. Every element of your consciousness is slowing down to a faint whisper, easing into a state of pure non-resistance where you are completely free to dissolve into the spacious dark. The mountain is still, the stream is level, and your heart is fully permitted to drop beneath the surface of the day, falling gently into the deep, dreamless rest that has been waiting all along to welcome you home. The deep, dreamless rest expands even further, lengthening the hidden spaces of your consciousness until every remaining thread of tension is entirely unraveled by the heavy quiet of the room. You are sinking past the layer of memories, past the unfinished blueprints of your daily work, and past the persistent urge to evaluate how well you are adapting to this quiet chapter of your existence. The analytical mind has finally run out of arguments, choosing to abandon its long post at the watchtower, recognizing that it no longer needs to defend a fort that was never truly in danger of collapsing. You are letting your entire identity drop down into the cool, silent depths of the present moment, allowing the unfamiliar contours of your reality to just exist without requiring a single explanation from the dark. Let the heavy, soothing warmth of this total non-resistance travel up through the base of your skull, releasing the tiny, subconscious bracing patterns that gather when you are trying to force your thoughts into a rigid alignment. Your eyes are completely soft behind their lids. Your breathing has slowed to a long, rhythmic glide, and the invisible weight that lived behind your collarbones has completely flattened into a loose, unhurried wave of pure presence. There are no sudden transformations waiting to surprise you in the corners of this space, and no invisible judges are standing over your bed to measure the speed of your emotional recovery. You have crossed the threshold into an ancient, timeless domain where your only task is to let the mattress take the absolute physical burden of your frame, letting gravity carry you forward while the world continues its slow, unmapped turning in the shadows. Think of how the vast bedrock beneath the mountain terrace feels during these quiet, midnight hours, when the cold rain has ceased and the heavy mist has completely swallowed the outlines of the stone walls. The solid stone does not shift its placement because the surface mud moved during the storm, and it does not carry a sense of panic because the old drainage ditches are filled with silt. It simply remains exactly where it has always been, an immovable, foundational presence that accepts the changing weight of the seasons without a single ripple of internal friction. You can allow your deepest nature to match that same undisturbed stability tonight, letting the dark blanket of the evening mute the lingering echoes of your daytime anxieties until your mind is as quiet and unbothered as the deep mountain granite. The ancient understanding that true peace is found not in removing the current, but in changing your relationship to its movement, is settling into the very marrow of your bones now, filling your body with a deep, comforting density that needs no validation from the past to authorize its rest. You are finally realizing that the integrity of your journey does not depend on keeping your life perfectly static, but on your willingness to stop treating an unexpected shift as a personal catastrophe. By letting the stream find its new level without throwing a single wall in its path, you have dismantled the hidden machinery of your panic, allowing your true, uncarved center to rise softly to the surface. The unmapped roads and the missing answers can remain precisely where they fell, untied and unpolished, without casting a single shadow over your fundamental worth. Let the total darkness of the evening wrap itself around your awareness like a heavy, seamless garment that carries no seams and no restrictions. There is no longer any digital screen to check for reassurance, no old routine to rewrite in the theater of your imagination, and no comparison loop to run through your mind before your limbs are permitted to go completely slack. The world beyond your windowpane may continue its complex, demanding movements, but within this quiet pocket of warmth, you are entirely exempt from the performance. You are the wide open sky within which the storm has finally run its course, a vast, unchanging backdrop that remains perfectly serene and whole, whether the clouds are heavy or light. With every slow, quiet breath that slides past your lips, feel yourself drifting further away from the rigid names and definitions that kept your identity bound to the wheel of constant productivity. Your hands are perfectly open, your wrists are completely loose, and the long, tense lines of anxiety inside your forearms have dissolved into a smooth, liquid comfort that pulls you down into the deep velvet of the midnight hour. You are returning to the uncomplicated truth of your own baseline existence, a deep, primitive sanctuary that has never been scratched or diminished by the evaluations of others, or the sudden blockages of your creative journey. The night has opened its most silent, timeless chambers to receive your weariness, offering you a place where you can exist without a single goal left to justify your place on this quiet earth. As the final faint images of the forest pit and the elderly woodcutter dissolve into the deep, dark current of your resting mind, the entire world outside seems to draw a single collective breath of total surrender. The iron tools are cold, the flaxen string is loose, the dark silt has settled completely in its grass basin, and the entire landscape has found its perfect equilibrium under the silent night. There is nothing left to guard against, nothing left to fix, and no masterpiece left to prove your right to inhabit this spacious dark. You are fully permitted to let go of the tapestry, allowing your heart to follow the slow, steady rhythm of the night as it carries you home into a profound, dreamless, and unmeasured sleep.